Welcome to the Martial Truth, Episode 7. There is no art in violence. So, violence. Violence is often something that happens unexpected. It's something we're not necessarily prepared for, depending on what you do and how you are and how you go through life. In my own situation, I was a police officer for 22 years. 17 of those years, I worked as a New York City Transit police officer, where I patrolled in the subway. During that time, I patrolled a lot of times solo, especially early in my career. You were given an assignment and you covered either stations, or in the beginning, I rode trains by yourself. And I rode trains in New York City starting in 1988. From 8 o'clock at night to 4 o'clock in the morning. Needless to say, that was a very dangerous time in the history of the city. Murders, everything, violence through the roof. So you learn very quickly just how fast violence can happen, whether it was to yourself as a police officer or to a victim of crime. When I first came on the job as a police officer, I was a second-degree black belt in Isshinryu Karate. So I'd been training already. I started in 79, so this was 88, so I had 9 years of training. Quickly realized not everything I was taught the way I was taught it would work in an actual situation. I also came to realize that in the case of a violent encounter, there is really no art in it. And what I mean by that is, if you think or believe in a violent encounter when someone's trying to seriously harm you, and that means that it's going to result in either you being seriously injured or dead, okay? You can't be worrying about throwing a side kick or a nice roundhouse kick, or, doing that joint lock the way it's done in the dojo where it works every time, because you're going to be in for a rude awakening. There's only two people in a life and death situation, and that's a winner and a loser, okay? So how you win is completely irrelevant. What matters is that you survive the encounter and you come out on top. So you can't be concerned, with, I want to try do this move, or I want to try this. There is none of that. The person's trying to harm you. You have to prevent them from doing it. And the way to do that is with superior violence. Your violence has to be superior to your attacker's violence. Now, when it comes to criminals, the predators of society, they can get pretty good at violence. They can get pretty good at harming another human being. Why? Well, because they get a lot of practice, okay? And I hate to break the news to people. I think, they're downtrodden, they're this, they're that. Okay, let me burst your bubble if that's the way you feel. Criminals, some of them, genuinely enjoy hurting you. I mean, they like it. I mean, you see that with serial killers, right? And we all want to believe that, the guy has to be crazy. He's crazy, right? Because if you think he's normal, well, then that means any one of us is capable of that. And I hate to break the news to you, but we're human beings. Any one of us is capable of great violence. Any one of us, okay? Ask a mother what she'd be willing to do to protect one of her children. I would say she'd be willing to do extremely serious violence on any individual that tries to harm her child. Okay? We all know that for a fact. All right? I myself, I know I'm an extremely violent man. Okay? I've been in combat hundreds of times, against criminals that, if I lose the fight, right, there's a good chance they're going to take my gun and kill me, okay? So you quickly learn that you have to have a mindset that no matter what, I'm going to win. So what does that include? So training in the dojo. We train in the dojo where the violence is stylized, meaning the violence in the dojo is not real. Well, what do you mean, Mike? Oh, we're doing full contact. Listen, that's great. You're hitting each other. Fantastic. Wonderful. Okay. Out there is a whole different story. Okay. The guy pulls a knife. He has a gun. There's 2 or 3 guys. Okay. He hits you. You're caught unawares. The terrain is dramatically different. Okay. We're in a nice level floor in the dojo. I was in fights where I was on stairs. I was on a subway platform that was only about 5 feet wide at 3 o'clock in the morning. I've been in fights where I was in the middle of a busy street. Okay. I've had to go out and subdue guys on elevated platforms where I'm 50 feet above the ground. Okay. One wrong move, you're gone. Okay. So this idea that actual real violence will be like the stylized violence we experience in a dojo is just a ridiculous idea. And even if you're doing full contact fighting in MMA or boxing or kickboxing, that's great. And you're physically a very tough guy, but it's a totally different environment and a situation when you're out in what I call the real world. Okay. I said in a previous podcast, I had numerous police officers I worked with that trained in what they thought were martial arts that would prepare them for an actual situation, and they found out that they weren't prepared. And one of the reasons they weren't prepared was they didn't realize they had to make adjustments in the way they were trained to now bring the abilities they had into a real violent confrontation. And this is what a lot of people don't realize. And what happens is a martial arts person may get into a situation the first time they're attacked for real, and their martial arts doesn't work. And right away they blame the martial art. Oh, that karate's BS. It doesn't work. Oh, that Tai Chi stuff, that nonsense, doesn't work. Okay, that couldn't be farther from the truth. These arts have been around for a long time for a reason. The techniques within these arts work if they're taught properly. The other thing is you need to understand, in a real confrontation, it's never going to be like it's like in the dojo. So I'll give you a for instance. Okay, the secret to self-defense, you have to be willing to poke somebody in the eye. If you're not willing to thrust your fingers into somebody else's eyes, you're going to have a problem in a life and death encounter. If you're not willing to strike someone in the throat, I mean seriously strike them in the throat, you're going to have a problem in a life and death encounter. If you're not willing to attack the groin, either by grabbing it or striking it, you are going to have problems in a life and death encounter. Those joint locks you work in the dojo where people tap right away when they feel pain, okay, well, if you're not willing to break that person's arm who's really trying to harm you, where it's you or them and only one of you are walking away, if you're not willing to use that joint lock to break the opponent's arm in a real confrontation, you got a problem. Okay? I couldn't tell you how many police officers I worked with who saw me put my finger in somebody's eyeball because the person wouldn't stop resisting and said to me afterwards, "What did you do to get him to put his hand behind his back?" And I said, "I stuck my finger in his eye." And their response was, "I could never do that." And my immediate response to them was, well, you better believe you can do that, because if not, you may get in a situation, if you're not willing to do that, you could be dead. All right? So the Chinese have a saying that the eyes are the general of the body. And we know in warfare a lot of times, especially ancient warfare, they love to kill the general, because if they kill the general, the army would be in disarray. So your eyes are the general of the body. If your eyes are taken away, how are you going to be able to fight? You're in big trouble, okay? I love all these videos I see where guys stand there and they take a punch in the throat and they take a kick in the groin, right? You're okay. How come I never see one of those videos where someone takes a finger to the eye? Where's that video? Because it doesn't exist. Anybody that thinks that if I take my finger and poke them in the eye, that they're going to be okay and they're going to be able to take it, they're living in fantasy world. Okay? Just think of the times when you get something in your eye or you accidentally get poked in the eye. It's debilitating, okay? So the thing is, you have to be willing to do that in a combat situation. But that's not very artistic. It's not very nice, right? Right. We're not talking about nice. We're talking about a violent situation where someone's trying to seriously harm you or kill you. You have to survive that. Now, hopefully it never happens. But you can't walk around thinking it'll never happen. Okay? You have to be prepared for it. So in my dojo, like last night, for instance, two of my students were working partner practice, where one was throwing strikes and the other one had to counter. And, I watched as the one student was actually working on thrusting his fingers to the eyes of his fellow student. And I just remarked, I said, listen, it's fine you work on that. Just be careful, watch your focus. We don't want to have an accident. So even in my dojo, I practice what I preach. I have people working on striking to the throat. I have people working on striking to the eyes, because if you don't practice it, you won't do it. You'll be in a fight and you'll do what you train. Okay? So you have to practice these things, right? This is why it's important to practice the joint lock until the person taps. And the person tapping shouldn't tap until they feel some pain. Okay? If they're tapping as soon as you touch them, they're not helping you training-wise. They're giving you a false impression of where the pain threshold begins. Okay? So it's also important a little bit to train in a careful manner where someone resists your joint locks and figure out, well, how can I do this? So when I first started as a police officer, one of my first encounters was a guy had a nail file between his fingers, and he was about to punch a guy in the face with it. And when I got there, I came up behind him and I grabbed him in a reverse kotegashi joint lock. And it worked great. The nail file went flying, right? But then the guy spun on me. When he spun on me, I reversed it to the more traditional kotegashi. And when I did the kotegashi, right, and I just want to add that in the dojo I trained in, everybody said I had the best joint locks. Okay, great. Here's the problem, though. This is my first time now doing kotegashi, the basic wrist lock, for real. And as soon as I go to do it, the guy takes his opposite hand and pushes against my shoulder here. So now the wrist lock, it's not working. So I immediately fired my open hand into his throat and seized him by the throat. Got him down, handcuffed him, arrested him. Okay. But it bothered me. I said, well, why didn't that joint lock work? That joint lock should have worked. And I remembered I was only shown one way to practice the joint lock, and it involves stepping back. And then I went into the dojo and I got one of the students that I trained with a lot, and I said, listen, we've got to figure out this wrist lock thing. I said, there's no way the technique's bad, because every empty hand art has the basic wrist lock. Everyone. So I'm like, okay, you're going to tell me throughout the thousands of years of combat, all these arts have this technique, but the technique's no good. No, it's me. It's the way I'm doing the technique. It's the way I was taught the technique. So I went back to the drawing board and I started figuring out. And what I had this student do was I had him resist in a bunch of different ways. But we were careful to make sure he didn't get his wrist hurt. And eventually we came up with a way of practicing the wrist lock where we realized it was extremely difficult to counter. Because one, it was done quickly. The angle was a certain angle that was very difficult to resist against. Okay? And it was very little to no time was left to counter. In other words, as soon as the wrist lock was being done, you were in tremendous pain. So that's the way I began to practice it. And in the future, whenever I did that technique in combat, and I did it, several times, it worked. Right? So again, so that was when I realized early on that maybe the way some of the things I was taught to do in the dojo, in the world of stylized violence, wouldn't work in the world of real violence. So then what I did was, I started looking at other techniques too. And if for some reason a technique I didn't work, I didn't blame the technique, I blamed myself. And I went back into the dojo and I figured out myself how to do it. Because obviously the people that were initially teaching me were showing me one way and not everything worked. Now some things did work. Some things worked great, but other things didn't work. So I had to figure it out and put it into practice. The other thing I'll tell you is being willing to fight is a huge advantage. So a lot of criminals, they will attack you with no hesitation. And oftentimes, because we're the good guy and we don't necessarily think like a criminal does, we think, oh, this guy wouldn't hit me. Oh, this guy wouldn't try to punch me or anything. And then that punch is on its way very fast and you're caught off guard. So my philosophy is always, I prepare for the worst, and when nothing happens, great. The last time I was in Okinawa, I was with Yogi Yosei Sensei from Uichiru and Matayoshi Kobudo, and I asked him, he was, in his 80s at the time, and I said, Sensei, how has the training changed? And he said when they first started, when they were told as soon as they put their hand on the doorknob to leave the house, they had to be ready. I would add to that and say you have to be ready all the time. Because again, you never know when that someone is going to kick in your door and come in your house. All right. And what are you willing to do to stop them from doing it? So like one of the things I use as an example, I say, so if two guys are coming at you and they're going to attack you and, you pick up something and you hit them with it and beat them to save yourself, that's pretty good martial arts. You've never done it in the dojo, but it worked and you survived the encounter. All right. So this is something to consider. It's not important if something looks like karate or if something looks like tai chi or if something looks like jiu-jitsu when you're in an actual combat situation. What you want it to be is you want it to be effective and you want it to work. Okay. So the main thing is you come out on top. All right. And you have to be willing to do whatever it takes to defeat the opponent or opponents that are trying to do you serious harm. Okay. So it's not about looking good doing it. It's about coming out on top and defeating the enemy. Okay. I can tell you one of the other things you want to do is this idea that, well, you have to be able to take a punch. I think as you train in martial arts, if you train correctly, the whole idea is not getting hit. Okay. So, we don't often practice ducking in the dojo. I do in my dojo, but a lot of people don't. They stay very upright in a nice karate positions or whatever. And it's important to learn combat tactics, things that work in combat. One of the things I'll tell you is a lot of police officers injured their hands. That's probably one of the main injuries. And a lot of times it's because the criminal ducked and they wind up hitting something other than the criminal. Okay? So the idea of ducking is a valid thing. I often used the terrain I was in against my opponent. So if there was an open door, I might take him in an arm bar, slam him into the edge of that door, disorienting him so I could put him in handcuffs. Remember, as a police officer, my function is to arrest the person. Killing the person is the absolute last resort. And you're only doing that if he's using deadly physical force against you. Okay? So you realize early on that it's much harder to actually have to get someone in handcuffs. I mean, if you were allowed to just take your gun out and shoot the guy and kill him, obviously it would be very easy to end every confrontation. But that's not the job of law enforcement. Obviously, that has to happen sometimes when someone attempts to use deadly physical force against a law enforcement person or a civilian for that matter, right? So the thing is to actually physically be able to control a criminal, get him into position to handcuff him and take him into custody is an extremely difficult thing. One of the things I used to do when I did various seminars around the United States was at one point I'd take two of the biggest guys in the room and I'd tell them, you have to put my hands behind my back, but you're not allowed to hit me. And they'd say, oh, well, can we do joint locks? I'd say, yep, you can do joint locks. Okay. I can tell you now, no one ever put my hands behind my back. And the response would always be, wow, I can't believe how hard that was, right? Because they've never had someone in the dojo resisting like that. Now, keep in mind, I wasn't trying to hit them. I wasn't trying to kick them, bite them, spit at them, right? I was just not letting them put my hands behind my back. So this is why it's important that, especially with the joint locks, that you train with some resistance in a safe manner. You have to be very careful. You can't just begin to resist on joint locks and then the guy winds up getting a broken joint or a seriously strained joint. You got to do it slowly and carefully. And you're still never going to be able to reproduce in the dojo setting what it's like in combat. And that's something you need to understand. The dojo, which I love the dojo setting. I love training it. Okay, it's fantastic. But the dojo setting is a fantasy. We practice violent acts within the dojo, but they're practiced in an extremely safe way, as they should be. Okay, we're training in a martial art. We want to be proficient. In my dojo, it's important for me, my students, to be proficient in real fighting. Not tournament fighting, not sport fighting, real fighting. Okay, so we train in a way that's serious, but we still have to train in a way that's serious and safe. If it's not safe, I'm not going to have any students. Plus, if it's not safe, it's not very good. Just look at the military. Does the United States military want its people that are in training getting hurt all the time? No. So they train in a way where they push the envelope as far as they can while it's still being safe. Okay? And the reason for that is an injured or hurt soldier can't fight for his country. So the training can only be realistic up to a point. Then when you actually, for the first time, engage in a life and death situation, that is usually your wake-up call for the fact that, wow, this is nothing like the dojo. This is nothing like the dojo. Okay? So I had a student years ago, won't mention his name, a long, long time ago, my first dojo in Manhattan, and young guy, early 20s, and every night I'd say to him, I say, you know, you got to put something into that. You're really not, you're not working hard. If someone really threw a punch at you, you'd get hit. You got to turn it up a notch. You got to push yourself. And he would just kind of laugh and go, yeah, okay, sensei, okay. And I said, listen, if you keep training this way, if someone ever attempts to punch you in the face, they're going to punch you in the face. And, this went on for a few months. And then one night he walks in and he's got his whole nose bandaged. And he's got 2 black eyes. I said, what happened? He said, oh, I got punched in the face. He said, sensei, you were right. It was so fast. The guy hit me so fast. I said, okay. So he came back to training, and it was amazing, the change in him. Why? Well, because he didn't like getting punched in the face. And he realized, okay, I've got to put a lot more into it. I have to put a lot more effort into training. Okay? So, if you're kind of going by the, through the motions and not training seriously, don't be surprised when the violent encounter happens that you can't handle it. And let's hope you survive it, right? Because depending on the predator attacking you, he may enjoy hurting you bad or he may enjoy killing you, because a lot of them do. A lot of criminals enjoy hurting others. When I first taught self-defense, I used to teach people, if the guy's robbing you, just give him your money. It's not worth your life. I no longer teach that. And the reason I no longer teach that is because criminals will hurt you anyway. And I'll give you an illustration. We went and took a report of a guy who had had his cell phone and his wallet robbed. And when we got there, the criminal had cut his throat here. And it was a big gaping wound. Guy survived, thank God. Thank God that the citizen survived. Okay. But what the citizen said to us was, I don't understand why he cut me. I gave him my phone, I gave him my money, I gave him what he wanted, and then he cut me anyway. And this is how things have changed a little bit. Criminals have become more violent. They like the power it makes them feel when they harm you. Okay, they like the feeling of cutting you, of shooting you, of hitting you. Okay, they like it. It makes them feel superior. It makes them feel powerful. Okay. So you have to be willing to counter that violence that they're going to attempt to use on you with your superior violence. Okay. So if someone is attempting to rob you, and if you think, okay, I'm going to try just giving him my money, and maybe the guy will walk away, that's fine. But you have to be prepared that he's still going to try to hurt you anyway, and you're going to have to deal with it. Okay? And that means you're going to have to deal with it. And that can be nasty. And that means you're going to have to poke him in the eye, hit him in the throat. You may have to bite him, gouge him, whatever. Okay? You may have to drive his head into the concrete. Okay? You may have to pick him up and drive him. Whatever you have to do to survive the encounter. The other thing. What you have to do is, if you're in that violent encounter, and again, this is something you won't experience in the dojo, you don't want to lose it. Okay? If you lose control, then bad things can happen. So, for instance, guy attacks you, you hit him, you knock him out. Fight's over. Now you proceed to start kicking him while he's on the ground. You start stomping on his head while he's on the ground. Well, you went from the victim to now you've got a big problem. And that problem is you're going to be arrested, okay? Because you're not doing what a reasonable person would have done, okay? You knocked them out, that's it, right? Same thing. You cannot, I used to tell cops in law enforcement, you cannot be angry at the criminal. It's just like the movies. The criminal's job is to be the bad guy. His job is to try to hurt you. You're the good guy. The good guy has to stop the bad guy. So don't get angry at the criminal, right? Because that's his job. He's a bad guy. I couldn't tell you how many times I had a criminal try to kill me, harm me serious, and I had to stop him and got him in handcuffs and arrested him. And then we get to the cell area. He's in the cell, and my normal standard line would be like, listen, I'm going to take the cuffs off you now and put you in the cell. As far as I'm concerned, it's over. But if you attack me again, I can tell you now, you're going to regret it. And, 99 out of 100 didn't attack me again. And they were fine, and they understood it was over and that they were in custody now. And that same guy, I might buy a slice of pizza later on if the command was having pizza delivered or something. And cops would say to me, Calandra, that guy tried to hurt you 2 hours ago. Why are you buying him a slice of pizza? I said, well, that's 2 hours ago. It's over. He's the criminal. His job is to try to hurt me, right? So I always took that attitude where I didn't take it personal. He's the criminal. His job's try to hurt me. So you want to try to bring that into a situation too. This way you don't go overboard and do something you might regret. Okay? So in closing, violence is not nice. It's terrible. It's brutal. It's nasty. It's not like the movies. It's nasty, brutal. Someone's trying to seriously harm you, and you have to do very nasty things to harm them to make them stop. Okay? So in the beginning I said, I know I'm a very violent man, right? But I've always used my capabilities in violence to help others. Okay? So I did it as a police officer. I've done it off duty. I've done it as a civilian where I stopped someone from harming somebody else. Okay? So being good at violence is not a bad thing as long as your violence is used for good and not for bad. I hope you've enjoyed this one. I wanted to talk about the nature of violence and the differences between dojo and real. If you've liked it, please click like, share, and subscribe. I'll be hosting a push hand seminar with Master Chen Zhanghua from Chen Style Tai Chi Chuan Practical Method in July. I'll be posting details on that in the near future, along with some other announcements. And if you have anything you'd like to see me do a lecture on, please feel free in the comments or send me a message. If you have a question you'd like me to answer, feel free to send it, and hopefully I'll be able to get to it. All right? Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll see you next time. Thanks.